GLP-1 medications are the long-awaited answer to the obesity crisis. So they're diabetes medications, which balance blood sugar, which helps to cut the food noise for consumers. And there's been a sort of scaling problem for the pharmaceutical industry because they've been so successful in helping to overcome obesity, leading to sort of 20% weight loss in 6 odd months. So incredibly rapid weight loss without the usual kind of need for willpower and motivation, that the success has meant that the supply from the pharmaceutical companies didn't meet demand. But they have reached scale now, and there's a huge amount of innovation going on to try to look at other ways to deliver the drugs. So, for example, pipelines are very, very close to being available for one-a-day pills that have the same effect at controlling kind of appetite-suppressing hormones. So that has led to an enormous amount of R&D for food companies who are looking to answer the needs of people who are taking these drugs. So not only are they looking at portion control, because one of the outcomes is that once the food noise is gone, people reach satiety very, very quickly. So portions become almost like these child-sized portions. But not only that, because they are eating so much less, some of the challenges need to be met by to find nutritionally complete foods, because when you're eating half as much as you once were, you're maybe not getting all of your vitamins and minerals and fibre needs met. So we're seeing a lot of innovation into nutritionally complete snacks and meals that mean that GLP-1 users don't have to think about, have they eaten enough that day to ensure that they're getting all the vitamins and minerals that they need. I think what's really interesting is where we sort of had these diet trends kind of bubbling up as a means to control hunger pangs, or foods that were particularly filling, so you can eat a lot of them but they have a low nutritional density, so they're not particularly calorific. We're sort of moving away from that because people are not needing that sort of motivation and willpower that they once did. And what I think is likely to be the case, and while something like 10% of US consumers are using these medications, apparently that is woefully underreported. So that isn't quite, there's much more people than that are using them. But not only that, if 50% of the US population is obese, we could see that number absolutely skyrocket. But also people are using it just to maintain their weight. And once they've started using them, because there is the rebound effect that once they stop using them, sometimes the weight comes piling back on. There are going to be a number of people who take them for the rest of their lives. And that seems like quite a common direction of travel. So we are in a new eating landscape where GLP-1 didn't exist, 5 years ago. Now it's everywhere, and it is going to dramatically impact how big a grocery shop is going to be, because people are literally consuming less food, and that isn't going to change. There is another component to this that needs to be considered, which is that either when people are tapering off the drugs at the end of the period of time, maybe where they've reached their goal weight, they are then looking to tweak their diet to ensure that the weight doesn't come back. So it's how do they do that? So there's the foods that they might want to take while they're using the GLP-1s. Then there's the food that they may want to take when they're tapering off them or coming off them completely. And so there's sort of two food opportunities there. And a lot of the focus has been on, especially for the people who are tapering, satiety. So that is a huge buzzword at the moment. There's a seismic shift in what consumers are looking for, given that GLP-1s are going to be everywhere. So we've got the people who are taking them, and they have very specific nutritional needs while they're on them, and they are looking for nutritionally dense foods, but in tiny portions. And then there's those people who are tapering off them, who often find their appetite comes back really, really fast. So satiety is the absolute buzzword in food innovation, and it is how do we make those people feel full without reverting to enormous portion sizes or incredibly unhealthy food choices, which will lead to them rebounding to the weight that they were at before. So there's sort of two different cohorts who have two different needs. And what we will see across all of the food chain is that any manufacturer or food service provider needs to think about, how do I serve these two new audiences, because they are already huge and they are set to grow. Where protein was once the kind of functional ingredient of choice, it feels to me like fibre is the new functional ingredient that consumers want and that fulfills some of the new dietary needs that are coming. And food tech is innovating in this space to provide soluble fibres that are, they're not, you know, the old people food of old, where you're talking about added bran or very sort of cardboardy iterations. And the challenge of how do we talk to consumers about fibre is that we use the term gut health, and that is a much groovier way of talking about something that feels like a very sort of unsexy kind of digestive issue. So fibre is something that is going to help with people who are taking GLP-1 medications because they suffer from their own digestive problems. But with all of the rise of kind of Zoe and the idea that we should all be eating much more, you know, legumes and thinking about the breadth and the complexity of our microbiome, a lot of particularly sort of beverage and snack companies are adding fibre to their products and then packaging it as great for gut health. And probably dairy was at the forefront of this, sort of the idea of your, you know, your Actimels or, you know, live bifidobacteria in your dairy products. That's now turning up in different forms because there's innovation happening in this space. So we're seeing a lot of kind of good for your gut beverages rising up and being packaged in a very sort of modern and fresh way that is appealing to quite a young demographic who would historically have found fibre something that that's something that old people need to worry about. So that feels like a real buzzword that is just going to kind of continue to accelerate over the next few months.
The Manosphere is the rise of masculinity, so traditional masculinity, the rise of misogyny, and the rise of feminism oppression as well. So you wouldn't think it would impact food and drink because it's all quite a social construct, but what we're seeing is a rise in the number of young men, particularly 16 to 24-year-olds, who are consuming more meat, so the traditional macho manly diet. And why this is a problem is because the majority of society are looking at ways to consume less meat for environmental and also ethical and health reasons as well. So this small cohort of men that are being led by blogs and other online literature is feeding into the opposite of what society is trying to go for. There are ways to combat this. So this group of people, obviously they're fueled by masculinity and macho-ness. They're not buying into the environmental reasons to consume less meat. They're buying into things like health and fitness. So outlets and retailers can feed into the conversation and push this agenda if they want to by feeding into the health sides of meat alternatives rather than the environmental. UPF, or ultra processed food, is a mess. It's a difficult conversation because there's definitions based on something called the Nova classification system, but it's not concrete and it's not agreed upon necessarily by the entire industry. It's flawed in many ways because if you think about a tin of beans, technically that is ultra processed, but it's also a healthy food when you think about the nutritional values of protein, fiber. There can be low sugar, low salt if you get those variants as well. But if you're a consumer who's avoiding a ultra processed food diet, then technically you should be not including that in your diet. The UPF is mostly a big conversation within the UK and America. It's not necessarily a big thing on the continent. So if you think about the Mediterranean diet, in countries like Spain and Italy and France, they're consuming whole foods mostly, and UPF makes up a very small amount of their diet. The big thing that the industry needs to know about UPF is education, despite the conversation being loud and broad and wide and in our faces, especially in the UK. The knowledge from the consumer set isn't necessarily there. So education is a big need for the industry, educating consumers around, well, just because it might be processed, that comes with benefits or longer shelf life or added nutrition or a multitude of things that could be better for the environment. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. There's a big risk of avoiding UPF because you're going to potentially make people miss out on the nutrients and vitamins that they need. It can also be more of an expensive way to live your life. So if you're consuming whole foods and cooking from scratch all the time, people who are on lower incomes can't necessarily afford to sustain that lifestyle. It also doesn't feed into the realities. So we're all time strapped. That's one of the big trends. People are time strapped. We need quicker ways of feeding ourselves and getting the right nutrition. UPF doesn't mean unhealthy, it can actually mean healthy because you can fortify, enrich, and make foods that are better quality. Premium indulgence is one thing that food and drink does exceptionally well. So when we look at hard times, so the 2008 financial crash, the cost of living crisis, people have less disposable income. So they're tending to look for affordable treats. It's also known as the lipstick effect. So instead of going for a meal out somewhere, you might invest in an M&S meal deal, for example, or you might trade up from a standard ready meal in the chiller to a more premium branded one that maybe comes with a side of fancy rice or something, or it might be a posh dessert that you put in the oven. It works within every category as well. So from chocolate to soft drinks, alcohol, you can always level up, and it's one of those small indulgences that people can tend to afford or feel comfortable about just giving themselves that little treat. But within food service, if you've got a good, better, best option within your business, or you can have an option that is just a bit special that might come at a nominal extra fee. So it could be an extra 10% that you're charging and it's got a bit of added value. It could be maybe it's a wild rice served with a stroganoff or something versus just a standard rice and you're going to charge a bit extra for that. It's adding that extra emotional, or just vocabulary around that product that will help consumers understand why they're paying more for it.
We are still feeling the sort of deepening and ongoing impacts of inflation and the cost of living crisis. And it feels like we're in a depressed mood state as a nation, as a continent, as a world. And so I feel like the need to meet consumers' mood has never been more important. So we're looking at how do you offset a sense of stress or a sense of needing a treat. So that idea of kind of meeting consumers where they are, which is just things are a bit hard. So whether that means we are giving into sort of permissible indulgence, so we're sort of saying, you know, you need that Friday night treat, and how does that look in the one place in our lives that can bring pure, uncomplicated joy, which is food or drink. And I think it's sort of taking it to its next level. We're seeing lots of brands and products being quite focused and nuanced about the particular needs. And so how can food and beverage products rise to meet the kind of emotional or physical state needs of the consumer? And it just feels like there's a huge amount of headroom that can be reached by manufacturers and food service providers.
I think the biggest trend that any food and drink business needs to consider is the functionality of food. So consumers are moving beyond just sustenance and satiety. They're looking for added benefits. So a product that can give them extra protein, be it a milkshake or a bar, or even a meal that's got added protein into it, is going to appeal more to a consumer these days, especially with the rise of the Manosphere, for example, where they're looking for that added health benefit. But also when you think about gut health, so gut health is a big and growing trend. It's moving into things like sodas, the new kind of modern soda. So people are looking at how that can impact their microbiome and give them positive effects there. But also brain health, so neurology and how different ingredients, minerals, vitamins can help consumers boost their brain power